I'm on a mission now to promote what I'm calling planned early negotiation. I've got a contract with the ABA to write a book about it, which incorporates both collaborative and cooperative practice as well as settlement counsel work. And you can think of planned early negotiation to contrast with ad hoc informal negotiation, which is what most lawyers do. We have a wonderful first-year required course at my law school called Lawyering, Problem Solving, and Dispute Resolution, and we teach them interviewing, counseling, negotiation, advocacy and mediation, and choosing a dispute resolution process. And one of the main things that I try and convey to law students is what their identity is, what their role is. One of the things that I talk about in the class is what kind of lawyer do you want to be, and how can you operate most effectively in the legal practice world that we live in. You know, we teach law students based on these appellate case reports, which imply that most of what lawyers do is appellate litigation, and that most of the things that matter in terms of making decisions are legal rules. And of course, that's not the reality for most practicing lawyers. So part of it is to have them get a better sense of the reality, in some ways the empirical understanding of how legal practice works based on empirical studies of mine and others, as well as talking a lot with practicing lawyers. So part of it is to have lawyers behave as well as possible and have as productive and satisfying work and service for clients. So, you know, that's part of my mission as I teach law students, the first year law students. And then in terms of practicing lawyers, I think that collaborative and cooperative practice are both really, they're planned early negotiations. So you know that you're going to settle most cases anyway. They're much more productive, well-structured, efficient processes. People may or may not know what they are, so I'm going to take a second to define them in case they don't. Collaborative law is an incredibly productive, successful movement. It started in 1990, really took off since 2000, used almost exclusively so far in family law. People are trying to have it used in other kinds of cases as well. Basically involves an agreement at the outset to use interest-based negotiation, four-way meetings, the full disclosure of information. The key element of collaborative practice is a disqualification agreement where the lawyers and the parties sign an agreement that says that if the parties choose to litigate, the collaborative lawyers are disqualified from representing them in court, and that if the parties want to have lawyers in court, they have to hire new litigation counsel. Cooperative practice is a new, small, fledgling field which doesn't have the disqualification agreement. It's also somewhat more flexible. One of the things is that although collaborative law is very good in lots of cases, it's not for everybody for a variety of reasons. And I think it's helpful to provide both lawyers and parties a choice of an alternative. So I've been exploring that, and there are a zillion people who are doing collaborative law and promoting that. They don't need John Lande to help them do that anymore. They've got plenty of folks. So although I'm very respectful and I recognize lots of benefits of every process, including collaborative law, and risks and limitations of every process, I've been focusing on encouraging lawyers to do cooperative practice. One of the things that I did was it's interesting, I wrote my first article about collaborative law in 2002. And when I first got into it, I thought, I didn't know very much about it by definition, and I thought, well, maybe the duty of zealous advocacy was going to be a problem. So I started looking into that and very quickly determined that that was not a problem. But I started to look into the disqualification agreement, and I saw, there may be some problems, maybe in terms of the rules of ethics, but I was more concerned about the practical problems about how there's potential that people can use a collaborative process to to take advantage of another party. I mean, in effect, what can happen is one party can use the process to fire the other party's attorney, even if it's not used in an intentionally abusive way. People can feel settlement pressure or excessive or inappropriate settlement pressure. And some people just are uncomfortable with that. And one of the things that a lot of collaborative lawyers find is that they have a hard time getting people to use the process because they're afraid of the disqualification agreement. So offering people a choice of a structured, early, interest-based negotiation process with or without a disqualification agreement, the empiricist in me says, whoa, this would be an interesting experiment. So in my first article, I said, oh, that we should experiment with it. After I had come up with this idea, I was looking around to see if anyone was doing it. In fact, there's a group in Wisconsin, the Divorce Cooperation Institute, that has been doing that since 2003. And so a couple of years ago, I actually did a study of the cooperative practice by the lawyers in this group. And the two big differences are, one, there's no disqualification agreement, and two, it tends to be more flexible. I mean, the good news about collaborative law is that it has a lot of structure and protections and process and infrastructure. The bad news is it has a lot of process and protections and infrastructure, and sometimes it's overkill for the lawyers, sometimes it's overkill for the parties. And one of the things, and half of the lawyers in my study of the Wisconsin group can do collaborative and half didn't. Even those who do collaborative, part of what made cooperative attractive to them was that it was driving them crazy to have the overkill of the collaborative process in some of the cases. So it provides more flexibility. In some ways, it's what lawyering should be, where you should be starting to look at negotiation, if it's at all appropriate, to try and negotiate early on, have a good exchange of information. In a family context, that may be full disclosure. In other contexts, it may be sort of planned staged disclosure. I mean, if you have a big civil case, you don't necessarily want to exchange box loads of documents at the outset, but you may be able to define relatively discrete, limited pieces of information that people would need to negotiate. And it provides an opportunity to go to court and litigate if you need to in limited ways, and do that in a cooperative way, which for some people, for some of the collaborative folks, might seem like an oxymoron, but actually lots of lawyers litigate cooperatively as it is, and a planned process can promote good quality litigation and then go right back into negotiation. One of the lawyers I interviewed in Wisconsin said that sometimes her clients needed what she called reality therapy, which was they needed to hear from somebody sitting in a black dress on a bench saying this is the way it's going to be for a while. So at the beginning of a divorce, here's what the child custody arrangements are, here's what the child support is, and then they can go right back into negotiation. They don't have to sacrifice their lawyers to go into court, and then they can continue to negotiate. So for me, part of the benefit of a cooperative option is that people can retain their lawyers. So that's part of, for me, it's this, the other thing I was describing was this article that I've just written called The Movement Towards Early Case Handling in Courts and Private Dispute Resolution, and it catalogs a range of processes to encourage the early, productive, self-conscious, intentional handling of cases to manage them in the most appropriate way. And there are a variety. Of course, one of the great things about the ADR world is that we have 1,000 flowers blooming, and so we now have to help people choose which of the flowers they want to use. So that's really kind of what my mission is. I'm looking forward to talking with lawyers around the country to help them develop cooperative practice. My hope, and I wrote a short piece early on saying I encourage the collaborative lawyers to embrace this and to offer both collaborative and cooperative. Unfortunately, many of the collaborative lawyers see cooperative as anathema and just are not open to it, although I'm hearing more and more that some of them are. So I would hope that some of the collaborative groups would incorporate that. It may need to be that there would be some groups that are sort of independent that are cooperative groups only. Maybe like the Wisconsin, where you have some people who are members of both groups. And again, I respect and I think there's a lot of value to collaborative. I just also think that it's not going to work for all cases, and particularly there are problems outside the family context. I think that although there's potential for some growth, I think that there are some real structural limitations why it really works well in family and it's taken off well there, and why in other kinds of cases it's a lot harder. So that's kind of where my passion and where my energy is going to be. So I'm going to be writing this book in this next year, and presumably it'll come out in 2011. And I'm assuming I'm going to continue doing my tour, talking to lawyers around the country to encourage them to do what I think a lot of them really want to do in the first place, which is to provide good service to clients, to be efficient, and to help them make decisions. So that's my passion.